George H.W. Bush was born in Milton, Massachusetts. He was born into a very wealthy family that was heavily involved in politics. George went to a very elite boarding school in Andover, Massachusetts. In 1963, he became a chairman of the County Republican Party and later on attempts to get a Senate in Texas, but his campaign fails. But George doesn't give up. He goes on to get elected into the House of Representatives for 2 terms and goes on to claim many important political seats, such as a director of the CIA and an ambassador of the UN. Moving on to something bigger, George runs for president in 1980, who lost to none other than Ronald Reagan. But George makes it up to the White House anyway, and serves as VP alongside Reagan for 2 terms and later goes on to become the president.
In his campaign, Bush advocated for a kinder, gentler nation, with unity, diversity, and generosity, and wanted more volunteering and community involvement. A famous quote Bush said was, "1,000 points of light of all the community organizations that are spread like stars throughout the nation, doing good." When Bush first came into presidency, there was a huge debt on the United States of about $2.8 trillion. But despite this, in his campaign, he promised no new taxes, which utterly failed. The economy needed new taxes to compensate with the huge amount of debt through the United States, so more taxes was imposed on the people, which resulted in Bush's popularity decreasing significantly. At the same time, there was a mild recession for 6 months, and as a result, Bush signed a bill that gave the unemployed more benefits. His legislation included the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 and the Clean Air Act. The Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 forbade discrimination in the workplace, public accommodations, or transportation for the disabled. The Clean Air Act concentrated on curbing acid rain, eliminating industrial emissions of toxic chemicals, and reducing urban smog.
One of Bush's earliest experiences with foreign affairs as president was in Panama when the Democratic leader started to become a dictator. After avoiding an attempt for a coup in Panama, on December 20th he started Operation Just Cause, where he sent in 10,000 troops in addition to the 13,000 already being there, and this led to the surrendering and being sent to prison of the leader. Another event that showed President Bush's foreign policy started on August 2, 1990, when Iraq invaded Kuwait. Bush's strongest method during the conflict was when he made a coalition and called international leaders to try to strengthen it. After the war was over, Bush explained that his foreign policy now would be to maintain the New World Order, which was a world with peace and free from terror. Finally, at the end of Bush's term on December 4, 1992, Bush enacted Operation Last Hope in Somalia to combat the humanitarian crisis of famine and starvation. This operation continued into the end of Bush's presidency until President Clinton suspended the mission in 1993. After talking about all these events, it's easy to see that George Bush likes to handle foreign affairs with diplomacy. He likes to keep peace and resist from violence for as long as possible until he has to take military action, which usually is extremely effective and does not last a long time.
George H.W. Bush had a relatively successful presidency. He did not accomplish many domestic dealings, but his most successful legislations were the Americans with Disabilities Act, Radiation Compensation Act, and the Clean Air Act. The Americans with Disabilities Act is still implemented today, and the Clean Air Act was beneficial for slowing down global warming, but the Radiation Compensation Act was mainly used after the Cold War. Therefore, it does not have a lasting impact, but was successful during the time. The accomplishments Bush executed with foreign affairs thrived on a larger scale. Bush is generally most known for his success invading Iraq for invading Kuwait in the Persian Gulf War. Bush also signed off on an invasion of Panama, which overthrew their drug trafficking leader. Lastly, Bush left off on a good note with the USSR by signing the START 1 to secure their relationship in the future. Although Bush is known for these victories, he is also recognized for his wrongdoings. Before his presidency, Bush was the vice president for Reagan. After an act specifically stated that the arms could not be traded for hostages, the Reagan administration was discovered to do just that with Iran. This scandal was called the Iran-Contra affair. Eventually, the issue followed Bush into his presidency. Bush claimed that he had no part in the scandal, but he pardoned 5 alleged contributors from their trials. Bush was never put to trial, but many people believe that he was involved in the affair. The Iran-Contra affected his campaign, but he also went back on his word during his presidency. People remembered Bush for breaking his promise to not raise taxes. These 2 situations ruined his re-election and would follow his name for years to come. Between the good and the bad, George H.W. Bush was considered the most prepared and educated president for his time.